Solo Leveling by Gong. Chapter 42 Part 1 To the Rescue. At that moment, Grokter felt its hair stand on end. What? Anxiety seemed to slow down time as honed warrior instincts rang alarm bells in its head. Bottom! Blood roared in its ears. It would die if it didn't get out of there. Grokter's warrior senses had been sharpened so well that they were like a blade and sometimes acted as precognitive powers. Like now. Grokter let go of the girl and sprang back toward the exit with animal-like reflexes. Kaboom! There was an ear-piercing bang, and shards of glass exploded everywhere. The orcs guarding the door stumbled back as their chieftain suddenly appeared in front of them. Grokter took cautious, measured breaths as he silently observed the scene in front of him. The creature sensed an extraordinary energy from a human male Grokter had never seen before, who now stood where the human female had been. Grokter's gaze shifted to the opposite corner with the windows. The entire wall was now gone, as if it had been struck by a catapult. Did he enter by breaking the window? Despite its enhanced vision, Grokter had been unable to follow Jinwoo's movements. The unexpected appearance of such a powerful enemy made it swallow hard. A bead of sweat rolled down its temple. Scream! Grokter looked up in the direction of the roar. It came from beyond the ceiling. Another powerful enemy was circling overhead like a hawk zeroing in its prey. This could be a difficult battle. Grokter was feeling uncharacteristically restless, but the enemy ignored the chieftain and its subordinates and moved to check on the female's status. Grokter addressed its new adversary. "I am Grokter of the Red Blade Tribe." This was a courtesy afforded only to opponents who could possibly endanger its life. Having introduced itself, Grokter then asked, "Who are you?" Jinwoo looked up and spoke quietly. "Shut up and wait right there." The human could speak the language of the orcs, but its surprise was fleeting. None of the orcs, including Grokter, dared to move a muscle at the force of Jinwoo's words. "Cough, cough!" Rubbing his sister's back, Jinwoo thoroughly examined Jaina for any injuries. Thankfully, nothing caught his eye besides the conspicuous handprint on her neck. Jinwoo frowned. "Are you okay, big brother?" As soon as her coughing fit passed, Jaina threw her arms around him with tears in her eyes. He gently stroked her hair the way one would to soothe an upset child. "Big brother? If he's Jaina's brother." "Oh!" The other students finally realized who the man before them was. Jinwoo Sung, an S-rank hunter. They were saved. Students broke down crying as they recognized him. Unlike before, their tears weren't prompted by despair and fear, but rather joy and relief. "Hick! It's okay. You're okay now." As Jinwoo tried to calm his sobbing sister, he extended his senses through the school. But the 17 people in this classroom were the only humans he could detect on the entire campus. A shadow passed over his stunned face. Jinwoo carefully pried his sister off him even as she tried to cling fast, then summoned as many shadow soldiers as there were students. "Go with my minions, everyone." When the students nodded, the soldiers picked them up to carry them out. Jinwoo made sure to assign Igris to Jaina. "Go on ahead. I'll meet you downstairs once I'm done here." Under normal circumstances, Jaina would have insisted that her brother go with her, S-rank hunter or not, but she couldn't bring herself to do so this time. Something about Jinwoo's grave expression unnerved her, so she nodded in understanding instead. At Jinwoo's signal, the soldiers leaped down through the shattered windows one by one with the students secure in their arms. The orcs, who had been so close to finishing their hunt, bristled at the sight of their prey getting away, but Jinwoo looked over his shoulder with a frightening glare. "I told you to wait!" The monsters all froze in place. The thought of going against the glare didn't even cross their minds. One of the orcs, its face now pale, cautiously monitored Jinwoo's movements as it murmured to its leader. "Sir!" "Shush!" Grokter agreed with Jinwoo. This was not the time to focus on the weak. A hunter stood before their very eyes. The battle to determine who would be predator and who would be prey was about to unfold. Still, I can't let them go that easily. Grokter gave its troops a silent order, and 2 bodyguards mobilized without a sound. Jinwoo turned around again after confirming that all the students had been safely escorted from the classroom. He hadn't sent them away because he was concerned they might get injured. These guys are just orcs. Jinwoo was confident he could take care of them in a matter of seconds. However, he didn't want his sister or the other kids to see what was going to happen next. With no onlookers, Jinwoo could cut loose. Jinwoo's head whipped in the direction of the stairwell outside the classroom. 2 orcs that had hidden their presence as much as they were capable were making their way down the stairs. They were going after the students, but Jinwoo wasn't concerned. Igris was with them, and Kaisel was hovering overhead. The only thing left to do is to get rid of these things. He softly exhaled, his breath thick with magic power. Grokter asked again, "Who are you? How do you speak our language?" Jinwoo ignored the questions and slowly advanced on the orcs. Grokter bared his fangs, realizing that Jinwoo had no intention of answering. "Attack!" At the chieftain's order, the fierce orc warriors all leaped at Jinwoo. "Grr! Gra!" From the hunter's perspective, the orcs moved so slowly that it felt like time was standing still. Jinwoo casually weaved through them, crushing them all. He didn't even need to draw a weapon, opting to use his finger. When the tip of his finger made contact with an orc, the creature's head, shoulder, arm, or stomach burst. He felled more than 20 in the blink of an eye, coming to a stop in front of Grokter. The orc chieftain could only follow the blur of afterimages Jinwoo left in his wake. Its voice quivered. What the? Before Grokter had a chance to swing its curved blade, Jinwoo grasped the monster's jaw in his left hand. The orc chieftain let out a short gasp. Guh! Jinwoo casually strode forward and slammed the beast's head against the wall. Wham! The sound echoed loudly in the empty hall. Jinwoo scanned the area from end to end. The hallway was littered with dead students. It was a gruesome sight, but instead of turning away, Jinwoo took stock of every single corpse. This was to make sure the one responsible for this would pay for its sin. The hunter's gaze returned to Grokter. "Why?" Jinwoo's voice was infinitely cold. "Why is your kind so keen on killing humans?" Grokter had already lost any will to resist. Trembling, it replied, "A voice in our heads. It tells us to kill humans." Jinwoo furrowed his brow. Kill humans? He had heard something similar before, but at the time, he'd interpreted humans to mean hunters. It was now clear the word had to be taken at face value. "Then what about me?" Jinwoo posed another question. "Does the voice tell you to kill me too?" Jinwoo leaned his face closer to Grokter's, so the orc had no choice but to look into his eyes. Whatever it saw in there caused it to recoil violently. "Forgive me!" Then something unthinkable happened. The great warrior of the mighty orc tribe began crying like a baby. Jinwoo's simmering rage cooled as he watched the petrified magic beast. I see. This creature didn't recognize him as a human either. Well, it doesn't matter. Jinwoo didn't care what magic beasts thought of him. He simply destroyed them because they were a threat to humanity. Grokter sobbed uncontrollably, shoulders quivering as terror consumed it. "Please forgive. I'll forgive you," replied Jinwoo. He then summoned the demon monarch's dagger to his right hand. But don't think the path to forgiveness will be a walk in the park. The strike squad from the Knights Guild couldn't help but gasp as they watched the magic beasts battle. Ah! How in the world? Could this really be called a raid? The ants easily overwhelmed the undead magic beasts and began gobbling them down. Chomp! Chomp! The hunters' eyes popped out of their heads at the horrific scene. But will there be anything left if they eat them like that? Right. They're consuming the essence stones, too. The hunters were devastated to see such top-tier essence stones ending up in the stomachs of the minions. Yerem couldn't watch it any longer and sprang into action. Hey, that's worth a fortune. When she tried to retrieve a corpse of a vampire, though, an enraged ant took a swipe at her. Arg! The soldier's claw slashed Yerem's arm, sending her flying backward. Whump! Ow! She rubbed her sore buttocks and made to stand, but as she did, K-R-R-R, she looked up to see the same ant standing over her. The beast opened its grotesque mandibles as if to bite her head off. Yerem was petrified. Ah! Ah! Just then, Baru appeared and spun the ant around, exactly as its subordinate had done to Yerem. Baru shoved his face into the ant soldiers, opening his mandibles wide. Scraw! A roar erupted from Baru, leaving the ant soldier trembling and unable to meet the eyes of a creature so much more powerful than it. He! As soon as Baru let go of its shoulder, the ant rushed off. Baru then approached the dazed Yerem and extended an arm. Huh? As a matter of reflex, Yerem took Baru's hand, and the ant hauled her to her feet. Thank why. The words died on her tongue as she spotted a faint blue light encompassing the tip of Baru's fingers. Healing magic? Yerem's eyes went wide. The wound on her arm instantly healed when the blue light touched it. Once Baru confirmed the wound was healed, he turned to scream at the other ants. Scrara! They stopped their feasting and began moving deeper inside the dungeon. Yerem quietly mumbled to herself as she watched Baru walk off. How does a minion cast a better healing spell than I do? Hunters arrived at the school and followed a mana compass to an upper floor. An incredible amount of magic power was being detected from the 6th floor hallway. The leader of the group looked back at the others. Be careful. His teammates nodded. At the top of the stairs on the 6th floor, they discovered the source. Ah! A man holding a bloody dagger stood before an orc he had cut into countless bits. Is that? The leader of the strike squad suddenly found it hard to breathe as he made eye contact with Jinwoo's bone-chilling gaze, but he eventually composed himself and picked up his walkie-talkie. Yes! Hunter Jinwoo Sung is here. His eyes swept the scene, and he reported, all clear. Due to the nature of the incident, a lot of people had swarmed around the vicinity of the school. My son is in there. Please let me through. I need to see what happened with my own eyes. Oh my God. I can't believe this is happening. Had the police and the Hunters Association not been there for crowd control, the place would have already been overrun. News reporters who had hurried to the scene once the news broke were busy recording footage. Huh? It's Jinwoo Sung. Get a shot of him. Jinwoo evaded the reporters and quietly approached someone who looked like association personnel. The staff member tensed at Jinwoo's dark expression. Hunter Sung, do you know where my sister is? Miss Sung was transferred to Seoul Ilshin Hospital with the other students. With a somber look, Jinwoo nodded and walked away. The staff member let out a breath they'd been unconsciously holding. When the medics arrived on the scene, the first thing they did was check on Jaina's status as per the association's instructions. Luckily, she was fine. Apart from the abrasions around her neck and wrists, Gina hadn't sustained any other injuries. Jin-woo most likely already knew all this, as he was the one who'd saved her. And yet, he's still in such a mood. Gina was okay because Jin-woo had arrived on time. But what if he hadn't? The staff member shuddered at the thought. It was truly a relief that she was fine. On the other hand, Jin-woo pulled out his cell phone with a heavy heart. Mom will probably hear about this. Many students have been slain by magic beasts, so of course his mother would be devastated by the news. I need to let her know Gina is fine before she hears about what happened. However, an unexpected voice interjected from behind him before he could dial. We've sent an employee to your mother, Hunter-sung. She's most likely being escorted by car to the hospital right now. Jin-woo turned around. Sir! President Gun Hee-go stood there with a grave expression that matched Jin-woo's. Even if this wasn't his fault per se, it was clear that the head of the Hunters Association felt personally responsible for this tragedy they'd been unable to prevent. Jin-woo expressed his appreciation for the elder man's consideration of his family, even under these circumstances. But President Go shook his head. We are the ones who need to thank you. 17 students. Thanks to Jin-woo, there were 17 more survivors than there would have been otherwise. We continue to owe you a great debt of gratitude. Jin-woo's smile was bittersweet. Regret still lingered about how he might have saved more students had he been able to use shadow exchange. President Go's expression conveyed that he had a vague understanding of what Jin-woo was feeling. Nonetheless, he shook his head. Now isn't the time to get lost in our emotions. He had a job to do. President Go looked up. Are you going to the hospital? Jin-woo briefly considered Gwangali Beach, but quickly abandoned that thought. His mana levels hadn't changed, which meant things were going smoothly with Baru and the ants. Not surprising. It's Baru, after all. So there was no need to concern himself with the raid. Yes. Then why don't I give you a ride? That's okay, sir. Let's go together. I have something I'd like to tell you. Jin-woo had initially declined because he'd assumed the offer was a mere courtesy, but he decided to accept President Go's earnest request. Okay, thank you. Jin-woo followed the president to his car, and they both climbed in the rear. Despite the spacious interior, the back seat of the large sedan seemed cramped due to President Go's huge frame and Jin-woo's wide shoulders. The driver, Jin-chul-woo, and Jin-woo exchanged nonverbal greetings via the rearview mirror. As the wheels of the car slowly began to move, the president of the association started speaking somewhat hesitantly, his expression dark. We might have foreseen this incident. Jin-woo was puzzled. Did the association let this happen even though they could have stopped it? Before Jin-woo's confusion gave way to indignation, President Go took out his phone to share something on the screen. It was a chart of some kind. This shows an increase in gate spawning in Seoul over the last 6 months. The steady line showed a sharp increase toward the end. The statistics are the same all over the world. The second chart looked almost identical to the first. Jin-woo would have thought they were the same chart if President Go hadn't clarified. Gates are increasing exponentially across the globe. He frowned. However, that's not the only strange phenomenon. He tucked his cell back into the inner pocket of his jacket and continued. Lately, there have been long lines of people at the association waiting to confirm their ranks as reawakened beings. The increase in the number of gates and magic beasts paired with a similar increase in the number of hunters to defend those gates. It was as if they were balancing each other out. Seeing that Jin-woo's curiosity had been piqued, President Go continued, perplexed. There is a change in the air. This was all still his own conjecture, so he ended by emphasizing that point. But this is just my opinion. Jinwoo nodded. It was certainly interesting information. No matter who looked at it, it was evident something was going on. However, there was nothing either Jinwoo or President Go could do about it right this second. Furthermore, this could have been explained over the phone. There had to be another reason the perpetually busy President Go had taken time out of a schedule like this. So what is it you wanted to talk to me about? The president retrieved some documents from a briefcase on the floor next to his feet, as if he'd been waiting for Jinwoo's cue. Japan, the United States, China, Russia, France, England, Germany, and even the Middle East. In other words, global superpowers. These documents are official requests from countries that want to contact you, Hunter Sung. You've probably already been approached through unofficial channels as well. Jinwoo recalled his encounter with the American agents from the Hunter Command Center, but didn't mention it. Truthfully, the Hunters Association has no right to stop them. We're just protecting your privacy as per your request. Jinwoo listened to President Go without a word. The decision is yours, but I get the feeling that Korea will have difficulty filling your spot if you do decide to leave. Instead of responding, Jinwoo looked out the window. While he was deep in thought, the hospital where Jaina had been admitted came into view. We will provide everything you need that's within our means. Nervousness settled across President Go's face as he put away the documents and made his request. So will you please stay in Korea? The Knights Guild strike squad followed the army of ants to the entrance of the boss's lair. Yute watched with wide eyes as the ants marched into the lair. Shouldn't we stop them, boss? You think that's possible? Jong-soo didn't think he could even attempt to persuade the creatures to pause the raid here to let his team harvest magic beast parts or magic stones. He let out a deep sigh. Let's just give up on those. He'd had a change of heart. Their original objective in entering this gate had been to prove to the public that the Knights Guild was still going strong. It would be more than enough to clear a high A-rank dungeon without anyone getting killed or injured. And without Hunter Sung's help, either. What happens in the dungeon stays in the dungeon, right? Even if they gave the ants credit for taking out the boss, people would still associate this success with the Knights Guild, not the minions Jinwoo had summoned before his departure. In any event, there would be no way to verify this once the boss was killed and the gate was closed, and Jinwoo didn't seem the type to blab either. Having reached this conclusion, Jong-soo managed to smile. It's a blessing in disguise. But just then, there was a commotion among the hunters in the back of the group. President Park, I think something's coming from behind us. Yes, I hear them too. Huh? Jong-soo headed to the rear with a befuddled look on his face. He could also hear several footsteps swiftly approaching. Did the collection team already come in? But the experienced Knights Guild collection team wouldn't typically enter a dungeon without orders. Oh! Jong-soo's train of thought was interrupted by the sight of a horde of undead magic beasts that hadn't been devoured by the ants. Could they have? He wondered briefly if this was why the ants had been feasting on the undead. But this speculation was quickly forgotten when he realized the beasts' numbers were far greater than his team could handle. Jong-soo urgently yelled, "Everyone, get inside the boss's lair!" Their only hope resided in the soldiers Jinwoo had left them. The strike squad fled into the lair without bothering to check what sort of horror awaited within. Once he confirmed that all his subordinates were accounted for, Jong-soo barked out, "Block the entrance!" Yerim threw up a barrier using her skill, Holy Wall. Bang! Bang! The Death Knights at the forefront of the horde crashed into the invisible barrier. Sweat beaded on Yerim's forehead as she looked back at Jong-soo. "Sir, it won't last even 5 minutes." "I know." The strike squad was already preparing for the inevitable battle they would face once the wall came down. But looking at the swarm of undead magic beasts buzzing around on the other side, they weren't too sure of their chances. "We'll just have to hope the minions manage to defeat the boss first, and then clean up this crowd for us." He frantically turned back to the shadow ants who were facing off against the boss, hoping against hope that it would be easy enough to deal with. Oh no! He couldn't help but stare. He knew very well which magic beast the shadow ants were up against. He'd heard its name uttered many times. It was a mage with a pale face and a tattered robe, an arch-lich, the most infamous undead magic beast that lorded over the other undead. Just our luck. Jansu's face turned grim. He still held out hope that the minions would kill the boss quickly and come to their aid, but their opponent was an arch-lich. The more likely scenario was that the hunters would finish off the undead first, and then join the minions in their fight. At that moment, Baru approached the arch-lich. As he did, the undead magic beast summoned over a dozen death knights to surround the ants. "Skrara!" Baru bared his mandibles and extended his claws. The arch-lich recognized the black steam coming off Baru's body. If it had eyes, they would have widened in surprise. "The Shadow Army?" The arch-lich spoke the language of magic beasts. Baru retracted his claws as communication was established. The arch-lich eyed the ants behind Baru and asked bemusedly, "Why is the king's army attacking us?" Hee. Baru let out a sound that seemed to mock the arch-lich and pointed at himself. "We were chosen by the king." He then pointed at the arch-lich. "You weren't." The arch-lich raised its voice in indignation and disbelief. "Nonsense! I will ask the king myself, so—" But before it could complete its sentence, Baru appeared directly in front of its face. The arch-lich flinched. Baru was an apex magic beast created using the life force of an S-rank dungeon boss. Although his abilities had decreased slightly when he was transformed into a shadow soldier, the arch-lich, the boss of an A-rank dungeon, was still no match for him. Baru grabbed hold of the pendant around the arch-lich's neck and thrust both it and his fist into the chest of the stunned boss. "SHHK! Arg!" Baru's hand emerged from the arch-lich's back with the pendant in hand. Being a former highest-level magic beast himself, Baru was able to detect the location of his enemy's life source, in this case, the pendant. The arch-lich shook its head. "No! And no!" Baru ignored the screams and squeezed the pendant. Crack! "You talk too much for a corpse." With that, the arch-lich disintegrated. Jansu's mouth hung open. He needed time to process what he had just witnessed with his own eyes. It only took one blow to defeat the arch-lich. One incident in particular had made the arch-lich so infamous: the annihilation of the Yellow Dragon Guild. A guild that had been quite the powerhouse in China had been completely wiped out by an arch-lich. However, their deaths might have been inevitable. An arch-lich could summon countless death knights, powerful undead magic beasts that also required several A-rank hunters to defeat. Underestimating a boss that at first glance seemed to not have bodyguards could lead to one's demise. In the end, the Yellow Dragon Guild had failed to close the gate, and a dungeon break had occurred. The timely arrival of Jigang Lu, the Chinese national-level hunter, had prevented the incident from becoming a full-blown tragedy. Now the story served as a warning to hunters about the dangers of the arch-lich. And yet, that monstrous ant had killed an arch-lich with a single strike. It was a sight to behold. Yute shared the same sentiment as Jansu, as he stood beside his commander with his jaw on the floor. "Oh my goodness!" Yute asked Jansu in disbelief. "Boss, isn't that an arch-lich?" "Yeah, like the one from the Yellow Dragon Guild dungeon break. And that ant just killed it. Yunti's expression conveyed his amazement. The other hunters were stunned as they listened to Jiangsu and Yuni's conversation. Archlich? That's an archlich? And with one punch? Wow! Everyone in the Knights Guild was left starry-eyed by Jinwu's minion and its ability to kill the boss of an A-rank dungeon in the blink of an eye. That is, everyone except the talented healer Yerem, who had been left alone to contend with a clamorous horde of undead beasts. The preoccupied healer was dying to know what was going on behind her. What is it? What happened? Her curiosity didn't last long, as something else shocking transpired before her very eyes. Huh? The undead magic beasts that had been seconds away from bursting through the holy wall unceremoniously fell to the ground like marionettes, whose strings had been cut. Whump! Thud. They remained motionless. President Park? Yerem looked at him, taken aback by the sudden turn of events. Johnson nodded to reassure her that everything was okay. Were the fallen undead beasts revived by the Archlich's power? The future had seemed bleak upon seeing the black cloud of magic beasts coming after them, but he could finally rest easy. Phew! Jiangsu exhaled as a elated grin spread across the faces of the strike squad. They were overjoyed that everyone was going to leave the dungeon unharmed. Good job, boss! What did I do? They did all the work. Yute turned to see what Jiangsu was gesturing at. The minions silently stared at the hunters as if to ask, so what next? They're kind of cute when they stand quietly like this. One of the ants suddenly roared at the ceiling for some reason other than out of apparent boredom. Scraw! Yunti's budding fondness for them evaporated just like that. Instead, he turned to Jiangsu. So, boss, isn't this the same as Hunter Sung clearing this dungeon by himself? Pretty much. Jiangsu agreed with Yuni's assessment. All the strike squad had done was trail after the ants into the deepest part of an extremely dangerous dungeon. The ants were Jinwu's personal minions, so it was basically no different than Jinwu clearing the dungeon solo. What frightening power! Jinwu's abilities were truly as amazing as the Jeju Island broadcast had demonstrated. Jinwu's minions were stronger than he could have imagined, and the man who could control them as he wished was astonishing in his own right. Then Hunter Sung can clear a gate by simply sending those guys in, huh? It was a casual observation on Yuni's part, but the implications gave Jiangsu goosebumps. Wait a minute. Jinwu had summoned over 200 minions on Jeju Island, but that only included the ones caught on camera, making the actual count unfathomable. If Jinwu stayed outside the dungeon and only sent in his minions, he'd need mana to summon and control them, so he wouldn't be able to use them all at once, but if he could use half or even a quarter of his minions, it would be so much more efficient than any of the top guilds. Dom. Had Jinwu's guild been a corporation, Jiangsu would have invested his life savings. Boss, I recommend we seriously consider joining Hunter Sung's guild. Huh? You? Jiangsu glared at the innocent Yute. The proper term is MNA. Knights Guild merges with new guild founded by Korea's best hunter. Wouldn't that be quite the headline? Yute choked a little. Are you seriously going to push for it? Think about it. With Hunter Sung's abilities and our guild's expertise combined, even the Hunters Guild couldn't hold a candle to us, right? There had to be a compelling reason Hain Cha, the vice president of the Hunters Guild, had left the guild to join forces with Hunter Sung, right? Yute brightened and nodded, but then pursed his lips and tapped his chin with a finger. But do you honestly think Hunter Sung needs us, boss? TSK. Jiangsu raised an eyebrow. Do you think Hunter Sung's guild can operate outside the law? Excuse me? Even if his minions can clear a dungeon for him, he still has to have the minimum number of Strike Squad members. Oh! Yunti's face lit up as it all became clear. You've got a point, boss. We'd help Hunter Sung reach the minimum head count, and he'd be helping us out. It was a win-win situation, a surefire way to shorten the time it took to perform a raid while maximizing efficiency. If they couldn't recruit the S-rank hunter to their guild, they just needed to join his. Yunte smiled at the rosy future Jiangsu had described. That'd be great, boss. But wouldn't we be riding Hunter Sung's coattails a little too heavily? What do you mean, riding his coattails? Sheesh. Jiangsu chided Yute before continuing with a grin. Let's just say we're getting in on the ground floor. Whatever you say, boss. As the two exchanged smiles, they felt tremors roiling the ground beneath them. Rumble. Oh! With the dungeon boss eliminated, the gate was beginning to close. Let's discuss this outside. You got it, boss. Jiangsu called out to the rest of the Strike Squad, who were patiently waiting for him. Okay, team. Let's move out before the gate closes.